What is your most vivid memory from childhood?
Well, I don't know if it's my most vivid, but the first one that pops into my head is a very interesting memory. My father was a soldier, and when I was very little, I think probably no older than 3, he was at the military staff college at Sandhurst in the south of England. And I have a very clear, visceral, experiential memory of being on a walk with my nanny and my brother, who's a couple of years older than me. So I must have been 3, he must have been 5. And we were walking through the grounds of the military college, and we stepped from the grass onto the parade ground, which is just like a tarmac, like a parking lot. And there were no soldiers on it. And it was, I remember it right now, it was extremely electric.
Wow.
Stepping on this space. And I think I asked, am I allowed to? It just felt like there was something, if not transgressive, but something unusual about this space, even though it was just tarmac. And my brother by then was sort of marching around, so I was just sort of stepping around behind him. But that is a really visceral memory, very early memory, and I can't have been more than 3. So there you have it. Something about, I won't say sacred space,
Yes,
but something very particular about that performative area.
What was your first aesthetic awakening?
Bloody hell. It's very cruel of you not to give me any warning of these amazing questions. I suppose funnily enough, I've just come in from our garden, our spring garden, Scottish spring garden. I suppose it's a Scottish spring garden, or a garden at least. I suppose trees have always been very important for me, and possibly very early awakening for me. Yeah, particularly trees. I would say sea also, but trees first, I think. Looking up at leaves on trees.
It's a beautiful image. Who are your early influences when you're coming of age as an artist?
Well, I've mentioned many times, but mentioning it again doesn't mean it's not still true. I saw the cover of Aladdin Sane when I was 12, 13, and I didn't have a record player, but I bought a copy of that album. And I carried it around without being able to play it for a few years. I think I got a record player when I was about 16. So that was a very early cousin, and happily, became a real proper cousin of mine. But seeing that album cover, and funnily enough, not only Bowie himself, but also I have come to know the graphic designer who designed that cover, which is such an extraordinary cover, who's the wonderful mother of Phoebe Philo, who's the designer, used to design for Celine, and her wonderful mother designed that cover. And so the combination of getting to know her and getting to know Bowie well was pretty glorious. So they were very early influences.
That's the best answer ever. Is there a movie that changed your life?
Golly. 2, again, in this sort of quick fire spot check. If you'd asked me last night, I would have a great answer. But the 2 quick answers that have come to my mind are the first film I remember seeing, which is a very strange story because I thought that it was a dream for years. I saw this film. I asked friends for years and years and years if they'd seen this film. I couldn't find anyone who had, so I thought, okay, then it was obviously a dream. And then about not that long ago, maybe 10, 12 years ago, I described it to somebody, and they said, that is Powers of 10 by Charles and Ray Eames, which,
Wow.
by the way, if you haven't seen it, anybody, please, you can go onto YouTube and find it.
Wow.
It's, I think, about 10 minutes long. And it's a film that Charles and Ray Eames were commissioned by, I want to say ICI to make. And I think it's been ripped off shamelessly through the years. But I saw it when I was about 8 on the television. And that changed my life, because what it is, very briefly, you start on a couple who, a top shot looking down on a couple sitting on a picnic blanket, and you go out, and you go out, and you go out, and you see that they're sitting by a lake, and then you see that they're sitting beside one of the Great Lakes, and then you see the United States of America, and then you see the globe, and you go out, out, out through the Milky Way, and then you come back in, zing, 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 back onto the back of her hand, into her skin, into her bloodstream, into her DNA, into her atoms. And that is completely life-changing. And whenever I have the opportunity to show young children their first film, I'll usually show them that or My Neighbor Totoro. It's an extraordinary film. And I suppose it was life-changing because it's all about scale and perspective. And so it was, in a way, I suppose, a really first hit of art.
Wow.
Even though it's a science film, it was about perspective and a feeling of macro, micro, all being same gesture. And then the other film that changed my life much later, when I was a student, was I remember I was at Cambridge University in England, and there was a great arts cinema, no longer, unfortunately, the Cambridge Arts Cinema. And I saw Tarkovsky's Stalker there. And again, related to dreams, there's a scene in that film that I had as a dream ever since I was quite a young child.
Wow.
Which is, there's a room full of sand, and there's a big bird, like a buzzard or something, that's flying towards the camera, and its wings, its pinions just touch the sand, and it flies. And I've had that dream since I was small. So that was life-changing when I realized that there is a collective unconscious, and art taps into that. That's a sort of chi of art. So that was life-changing, I would say.
Beautiful answers. Do you feel that your work that you do as an actor or is in any way autobiographical?
I love that you paused.
Yeah.
Because it was extremely courteous of you to call me an actor. But I understand the pause. What you were going to say, or whatever.
I was also thinking about your work as performance and
I get
writer.
I get it. I totally get it. I've never been comfortable describing myself as an actor or anything particularly, but I would say yes. I mean, my sense, I mean, the way in which I became an actor, if I've become an actor at all, is entirely to do with my having gone to university as a writer. And I mean, I got in order to write. I mean, that was what they valued me for, to be a writer. And I stopped writing the second I arrived. And then I met friends, became pals with people who happened to be really into plays, and they were doing plays, and I wasn't into plays at all, but I started hanging out with them, so I started being in plays with them. And in many ways, there is a very strong relationship for me about not writing and performing. It's a way of writing for me. And it's my way of distracting myself. I mean, I'm fully distracted. If I could just stop performing, I would write all those things I'm supposed to be writing. That's the way I feel it is. But so I always feel that my work is autobiographical. Whether I ever could discuss that with anybody, I don't know. And most of the time it's entirely private. But yes, I think of it as, I mean, it's autobiographical in the sense that I've been very fortunate for most of my working life to work to be part of the devising of the work.
Mm-hmm.
Very occasionally, someone's had an idea in a kind of slightly industrial way, got in touch with me, asked me to play a part in something that would be made anyway. Even if I didn't do it, somebody else would do it. But that's very rare for me. That's like a sort of holiday for me. Normally, I'm developing projects with filmmakers, and I am a part of the finding of the narrative. And usually that is the sort of settling on a narrative is wherever one's nose has led one most recently. And that is usually something that's informed by the piece of work one last did. And, you know, you pick up the slack from the last piece of work, what you sort of tickled your fancy with through that piece of work you didn't manage to address in that piece of work, you go forward into the next one. And so that's so it's autobiographical in that sense. It's sort of very much driven by my own curiosities and my own interests.
What is the least favorite part of the artistic process for you? The least favorite?
The least favorite, which doesn't really feature that much, but is when the work is being disseminated in the world. I mean, I actually love the conversation is what it's all about for me, meaning the conversation not only with my colleagues, but also with the audience and also with journalists. So I don't have any problem. I know I've heard many people talk about having an inhibition or a problem about, you know, continuing that conversation with journalists. But I really, and this is going to sound arrogant, but I really mind when people try to tell us how to organize that conversation. I feel that conversation with the audience, with the journalists, is a part of the work, and that we know how to do that. And I really mind when sort of professional PRs tell us how to organize that, because it's our business. But that doesn't happen that often, to be honest. I have to really scrape to find something that I mind as much as that. Yeah.
What about the opposite? What's the part that you like the best?
I think the pre-production, the preparation, which can last for years.
Yes.
In my case, it's, you know, decades sometimes. I mean, the first film I made, I was trained well. I mean, the first film I made with Spencer was Caravaggio, Derek Jarman's Caravaggio. And when we first came on board, he had already been working on the script for about 11 years. So already I knew, okay, this is a long game. And then my life has been full of these long gestations. I made a film with Luca Guadagnino, I Am Love, which we developed for 12 years. The last film we made together, Suspiria, we'd been talking about for 21 years, I think.
Wow.
And I love it, actually. I love that long gestation. Obviously, there are other things going on, so it's not like that's the only thing. It might be a hard boulder to carry if it was the only thing you were doing, you know, carrying this one project. But I love it. I love the way every year, every 6 months, every month brings another location, another inspiration, another, you know, turn of the wheel, another person who's suddenly old enough to be a part of the project, or whatever. And I think the development, all the chewing the cud, all the wagging of chins, all of that, I like that.
So if you look back retrospectively at the work you've done, can you detect certain central themes or preoccupations that run through your work in general, the things that sort of are consistent in terms of and define you in a certain way, I guess?
I do sort of have an answer for this, and recently I've had sort of cause to think retrospectively. The last thing I did before we all got locked down was I had a retrospective in London, and so I had to think about this, and I have identified that identity is something that I'm truly interested in, and that's the thing that keeps me performing. I'm not that interested. I wouldn't go on performing were it not for this interest in unpicking or examining how it is that we lumber ourselves with the idea that we have one identity and we have to carry it, and we cannot change it or modify it in any way until we die. And that both moves me and saddens me that society has somehow hoodwinked us into thinking that this is the case. Because as far as I'm concerned, identity is a sort of, I'm not sure I believe identity exists. I think the only thing that we can really rely on is change, and our sense of ourselves is completely amorphous. And so if I'm talking about a narrative, I look back at my work, very often I'm looking at the story of someone who reaches what I call a precipice in their life, when they have to encounter their sense of identity and they have to shift, or they have a choice about whether to shift or whether to perish in some way. And so whether it's Orlando reaching the end of what it is to be a man, to be a killer, and somehow deciding or somehow transforming into a woman, or if it's, incredibly well-behaved service wife in the deep end who, somehow manages to end up dumping a body and having a sort of romantic affair with a man with a dice on his neck, or whether it's a raging alcoholic in the case of Julia, who, ends up sort of becoming a mother to this child who she's, been threatening all along. That feeling of people uprooting their sense of themselves and being challenged into change. I think that's a pretty regular theme tune for me.
I would agree. Who's your imagined audience?
It's funny. I'm pausing because of the word imagined, because one of the really beautiful gifts of my life has been working with Derek Jarman. Derek Jarman was the person who, if I hadn't met Derek and he cast me in Caravaggio, and I then lived alongside him and worked with him for 9 years until he died in 1994. I don't know that I would be making art. And to answer your question, one of the things that I was gifted through this extraordinary experience, that we were all gifted, was not just an imagined audience, but a real known audience. We knew, and I still know, that we have an audience. I just know it. We met and meet our audience. Wow. and know it. And it's really a gift. And it's very interesting because I've had such strange and unexpected adventures, given that that's my route. I come from the world of art, and I work in cinema, and then I'll suddenly end up making a couple of studio pictures, which are complete experiments for me. I mean, those are my experimental films. I remember once having this great experience when I was shooting Julia with Eric Zonka in Mexico City. And we were shooting at night, and there was this huge crowd of street children who came up to me, and they were all kind of grabbing my knees. And I didn't know what was going on, and I realized that they'd all seen the Narnia film, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And for some reason, kids love that witch. I mean, there's nothing like kids love more than real evil. And there was this fantastic moment when they were all just milling around, being so excited about the Narnia film, when my sweetheart Sandro said, "Future Derek Jarman fans."
Yes, right, exactly.
It was so great. And so the fact that you know, beginning with Derek and working in that world and continuing to work in that world, and then occasionally popping out to, you know, put on a tux and play with the big boys, as it were, knowing that there will be some kind of cross-pollination of these two audiences, that's a trip. That's quite fun. But I do know, it's not that I imagine the audience, I know it. It's, I don't know, it's my pals, they're people that, you know, I remember in the days when we used to walk around cities, you know, if anybody recognizes me, there's always a slight sort of like a almost Masonic handshake of sort of people are, it's like a secret code that gets passed. Those are my people. And so I know them. I don't just imagine them.
What work of art or movie has made you cry?
Ooh, well, I don't know whether anybody else has had this experience, but in the first 2 weeks of our lockdown experience, my family and I we've been really indulging ourselves with our film viewing. We've been pacifying and comforting and nourishing ourselves with watching our favorite films. And it's been really interesting what we've been choosing from night to night. And now we're sort of beginning to go off-piste a little bit and taking a few risks. But for the first 2 weeks, we just didn't want to take any risks. We needed to be nourished.
Yes.
And it was interesting that the two places that we went, the two people that we went to for the first 2 weeks exclusively were Alfred Hitchcock and Miyazaki Hayao.
Oh.
And Miyazaki just has me with every frame. I mean, the very first frame of Kiki's Delivery Service, when she's lying on the hill and there's that Miyazaki sky.
Yeah.
In fact, I've got a photograph of it on my phone. I can show it to you.
Please.
I took it because that made me cry. That makes me cry. Hang on, here it is. Look, this is a little girl lying on her back. There's a bee.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God, yes.
Yeah, that's pretty much the first thing. So that'll do it for me.
And Hitchcock?
Well, Hitchcock, I mean, Hitchcock doesn't make me cry. Hitchcock makes me weep with delight occasionally, but no, just so thrilling. The filmmaking is so phenomenal. Yeah, and I'm so delighted that my children from the very early age really understood. I mean, I remember showing my children the 39 Steps when they were 10, and my son, who's downstairs actually, said, who's now working in props.
Wow.
He's a prop boy. He might have to come and work with you, Gregory, one day.
And your daughter is an actress, so it's...
No, she's not. She's a psychology student. Psychology and neurology. Yeah. But she has made 2 films.
Yes, yes.
But I remember him saying when he was 10, having seen the 39 Steps, I would like to see more films by this director. And I was so amazed that he even knew the word director.
Wow.
But there's something about that film that can tell a 10-year-old that there's direction at work.
How has success affected your work?
Am I allowed to ask you a question back?
You're allowed to.
Well,
I'll answer.
The question is, what do we mean by success? Because
however you like to define it.
Because, you know, for example, one way of cutting that cloth is you would imagine that success, I would imagine that a sense of success would be to know your audience and to feel like you'd reached an audience. But I had this great grace of meeting my audience really young. I mean, with Derek, through Derek, thanks to Derek. And that, so I lucked out like straight off the bat. So I feel like I've been, in that sense, successful throughout. I've known my sensibility, and I've known my people. I'm so fortunate. I have my comrades wanting to work with me, and we are safe in that sense. I mean, I know what I'm doing for the next 5 years, whenever it starts again. I have my colleagues. We have our play dates all set up. That's very successful. But then again, I feel like I've been spoiled there. I'm not as broke as I used to be. That used to suck big time, especially when I had little children. But we live very modestly in the north of Scotland. That really helps. That's a really good idea, by the way. Not only to live in Scotland, but to live modestly. It's a really good tip. Because then it means that you don't, you can live it large with your work, and you don't have to do any dastardly dealings. So that's successful, I suppose. Feeling free, feeling that I can live where I want to, and that people will still come and find me here, and that I can, make my own tracks. But the reason I'm hesitating is I'm sort of embarrassed to be so lucky, but I don't know. I mean, apart from the days when I was broke, when my children were little, all the rest I've always been lucky enough to have. And that's because I was welcomed into this milieu of filmmakers, right at the beginning, through Derek, and I met Sally Potter, we made Orlando, I met Peter Wallen, we made Friendship's Death, and then it rolled on, so okay. that
maybe I could turn the question slightly and ask, what have you learned from failure?
Oh my God, it's the best. Yes. It's the best. What have I learned from that you can survive? I mean, survival's where it's at, learning that you can survive, learning that it doesn't matter. I mean, again, what's failure? And when we worked with Derek, I don't know where Spencer's gone, but anyway, he can tell you this is true. But we made films with Derek in the late 80s and early 90s that were panned, just panned. And we did not care less. We couldn't care less. And we were young artists, Spencer and me and Sandy Powell and Annie Simons and Simon Turner. And we learned that it doesn't matter. So we were happy. We made the films we wanted to make. We were all together, which was actually the most important point. And so the failure, whether the film made any money, they're all classic films now, by the way. Absolutely. They didn't make any money in not even their first weekend. They didn't make any money in their first decade, but they're all classics now. So that sort of feeling of just frisbee it out and it will find its way. We learned that really early with Derek. And failure, a badge of failure is always quite a cool thing as well.
Do you have any guilty pleasures?
Many.
Do you want to tell us just?
Well, I mean, we just had Easter, and we were playing a game the other night, and one of my children anonymously said there was some silly game, sort of, we all had to say a truth about ourselves and a lie about ourselves, and it all get mixed up, and people had to guess whose lie was what, and somebody anonymously said that there was way too many Lindt chocolate bunnies in this house. So there's quite a lot of milk chocolate Lindt bunnies in this house. But that's a particular Easter indulgence. yeah, I mean, I'm watching a lot of trash at the moment, which I'm really enjoying.
Please tell us.
Oh, just, you know, I'm doing that wonderful wormhole thing down the YouTube lanes, and just picking up documentaries about extraordinary arcane people. And but again, it doesn't feel guilty. It feels completely productive, particularly at the moment. I'm supposed to be working, but I've given up working. I'm doing a lot of ironing. That's not a guilty pleasure, but it's really good fun. I love it. I think I'm going to start a laundry.
So I have one last question.
Yeah.
And it is, what advice would you give the students in this moment of peril?
See it as the opportunity it is. Every moment is a moment of peril. This is no more a moment of peril than any other moment. I mean, my sister-in-law's sister, last Wednesday, she has a small company, letting company, and she had a very stressful Zoom conference with her employees because she had to let a number of them go. Mm. And it was an extremely upsetting meeting. And she went home from the meeting and she went upstairs to lie down because she was so harassed by the meeting, and she died. And I don't know if she had COVID. I don't know, but that is a COVID death. And she was so stressed out and so worried, but you know what? She might have died anyway. She might have died even if she'd been walking along the beach. Mm. This is no more a perilous moment than any other. But what it is for us, artists and thinkers, it's an incredible opportunity. Mm. And I really don't want to sound either complacent or, you know, it's not actually elitist. It is a choice to see it as an opportunity. You know, none of us are working in the health service, and none of us are in that kind of peril right now. But we do have an opportunity to dig deep. And that doesn't necessarily mean stressing ourselves out and forcing ourselves to finish our book like I'm supposed to be doing. But it does mean being incredibly grateful and just rocking all these extraordinary days. This will, I hope and I believe, never happen again. We will never have this incredible sort of rolling aimlessness. It's an artist's dream to have this rolling aimlessness. We have to use it, because rather like those long gestation periods I was talking about for the films, when it ends, we're going to look back and go, fuck, I should have used that time better. It's so great. We have to use it, and we have to be so grateful. And we have to be so safe and healthy, and do what we can to support all the people who are really having to, you know, tough it out. But as artists, we have to, you know, appreciate it for what it is. It's a unique opportunity.
Well, with that extraordinary answer, I'm going to ask all the students to turn on their audio. And Tilda, do you have time for a few more?
I'm here for you. Absolutely. 100%.
Okay. Would anyone like to ask a question? You 464 of you out there.
What's the source of inspiration for you?
Could you ask that again? Because I think you cut off. The first bit got cut off. What's
the source of inspiration for you?
I would say the main source of inspiration is fellowship. I tend to work in collaboration. I mean, very occasionally I'll work alone, like when I write. Of course, I write alone. But even when I write, I notice that I write in dialogue. I mean, I tend to write essays, and the essays are almost always, whether explicitly or in some kind of internal mechanism, addressed to somebody. So I think the fellowship of my comrades, and there's nothing like a close working relationship. And I've worked many times with the same people, and I love that. I love the feeling of sort of ancient fellowship. But you know, you can meet someone. Gregory and I met to make a piece of work together, and we went on a drive. Well, how long was that drive? It's about a 6 or 7 hour drive, wasn't it?
It was from Rutland, Vermont, New York, which we.
It was completely fantastic, and we've only worked together once,
Yeah.
but it feels like we're long-term colleagues because of that conversation. So I would say that's the main source of inspiration for me.
I had a quick question. Thank you so much for coming and spending this time with us. We all really appreciate it. I was wondering if you could talk about sort of the differences between engaging in like acting for film or theater and then performance art, like sort of the different ways or the different spaces you have to occupy.
Well, that's a great question, Nabil. I really don't know how to answer that one because I don't know that I identify a difference at all, to be honest. I mean, this may sound like I'm going off at a tangent, but it's the way I'm thinking to answer this. First of all, I don't identify myself as an actor. And when I say that, I'm not just being coy and being specific about the fact that I don't live like an actor, I don't know many actors, and I don't know anything or care about talking or reading or writing about acting. It's not something that really engages me. I never trained to be an actor, and I don't really know how to talk about it. When I work as a performer, the thing I'm interested in, and I've been talking to people about it recently, and I realize that this is relatively rare that someone in my, as a performer's position talks about it. What I'm talking about and thinking about all the time is the frame. Whether I'm dealing with a still frame or whether I'm dealing with a moving camera frame, that is my point of reference. Now, the reason I say that is a particular thing is because as I understand it, most what I call proper actors don't think about the frame. They're thinking about their performance, and they're thinking about their, I don't even know, but I think they're thinking about the bounds of their interest are the bounds of their frame somehow. I don't know. I would need a real actor to talk about that and tell me I'm wrong. But I don't hear many actors talking about the frame. And the frame, for example, if this was happening right now, this is extremely important that we had this yellow cushion here. Because if it wasn't there, it would just look so different, But the fact that it's just popping up there is just, it's company for me. Mm-hmm. And the fact that I didn't construct this backdrop, by the way. I could have done a much nicer job. I'm sitting on a sofa and I've got, half a door and a thing in the background. But you've all been looking at me for a while and you've been noticing my wallpaper. That's the thing, right? It's not insignificant and it sits alongside me in frame. That's real grist to my mill. I love all that. And I don't, by the way, work in the theatre, haven't worked in the theatre for years. The last piece of theatre that I made was a one-woman show at the Royal Court in London. And I loved it so much because I was in relationship with the audience. It was like a stand-up show and I had a microphone and I was talking to the audience. And after that, I thought, well, I can't go back to this fourth wall thing. I'm just not interested in ignoring the audience anymore. So I haven't done any theatre for 30 years. But the same is true in my piece, The Maybe, for example. The frame of the box is as important as what's inside the box. And then beyond that, the frame of the environment, whether it's in MoMA or whether it's in the Serpentine Gallery, or if it's in the Museo Baracco in Rome, or wherever else I make it, it's the context and the environment that's as important to me as what I'm doing. I'm not really interested in what I'm doing as a performer. I'm much more interested in sort of taking my place in amongst the mise en scène.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Tilda.
Hi there.
Thank you so. Oh.
Jonathan, yes, go
Hi,
ahead.
Jonathan. I see him with his lovely pink. He's got a great backdrop, by the way. I should have thought of something better.
Thank you, Tilda, so much for speaking to us. You're such an icon for so many queer people, and you've been in this role of being this androgynous person for so long. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on gender and queer identity and the ways in which lens-based media help spread awareness almost of lives other than mainstream straight identity, I would say, maybe?
That's a great question, Jonathan. And it's so interesting that you ask it now, because again, I've been having the opportunity in the last year or so to think about this a lot. Last year, I had the great good fortune to be invited by Aperture magazine to curate, to guest edit an edition. And we decided to make the subject of the edition Orlando, which gave me the opportunity to look back again at Orlando and to work with extraordinary artists like Micklin Thomas and Collier Shaw and extraordinary people on sort of their updated or their renewed response to Orlando. And so the reason I mention that is because I realized, I mean, it just made me feel unbelievably old, because I was thinking about when I started working with Sally on Orlando and when I was working with Derek. It was unimaginable that you would, you know, have an all-gender bathroom, or, you know, when we were trying to raise money for that film and we were telling people what it was about, they went, "You're never gonna get an audience for that film." You know, we knew, because as I've said earlier, we knew that we had an audience. We knew then that gender is a complete, what I always used to say was a fig leaf of the imagination. You know, it's like gender, schmender, whatever. It's, you know, it's just not actually a barricade, gender. I mean, it never occurred to me that gender was a thing. You know, it's a, you know, even in the early days when I was a young artist and people would, you know, they would say to me, "Well, you're constantly working in the homosexual community, you know, are you homosexual?" And I would say, "I'm sexual. Why do we need a prefix? You know, there is literally no need for this paraphernalia." And that's 30 years ago, maybe more. And here we are now, you know, the wheel has turned, and slowly there is a sense of real sort of, yeah, there's a sort of that sense of comfort has bedded in. It's starting to bed in. We're beginning to let go of these fixed ideas. So I can't even remember what your answer was, but I think that you know, the image media is incredibly important in just softening up and infiltrating and not just educating, but it's sort of realigning children, grown-up children, with the freedom that we all know when we're children. You know, when we're children, we don't even think about gender, you know, if we're lucky. I mean, I had 3 brothers and they still tried to make me think about gender and it didn't work. But that feeling of freedom and a feeling of fluidity, which we know as children, image media can reintroduce that. It's not a new thought to people. That's what I'm trying to say. It's, you reintroduce it to people. You remind them of that sense of fluidity. And I think it's very much the province of image media to do that. And you know, there's never been a more fecund time for image media to do it than now. I think it's beginning to give. Wouldn't you agree? It's just beginning to lift off. Jonathan, do you agree that it's beginning to work? You're so young, you don't know what it was like 30 years ago, but it's no longer a brittle thing, it feels to me. It feels like it's beginning to sort of really flow.
I feel slowly but surely, yes, but then there are powers at play that constantly are attempting to, like, suppress people in their sexuality and their, so I do feel that image-based media is the perfect medium towards building empathy.
Yes.
And so that's why I was wondering your thoughts on it. So
I think that's right. But at the same time, back to Orlando for a second. When I reread Orlando, and Orlando's become a book, and for that matter, a film that's become very famous as being about gender and about transgender. And I reread the book again. I reread it like once every 5 years or so. And it's not about gender at all. It couldn't care less about gender. It's about freedom. It's about freedom. It's about boundarylessness, whether that means a boundarylessness of nation, of class, of gender, of age. I mean, it's about someone who lives for 400 years. It's about immortality and absolute fluidity. And my fantasy about the book of Orlando is that if Virginia Woolf had written another 1,000 pages, maybe in the next bit, Orlando would have turned into a spaniel or I don't know, an iris or a sofa or a yellow cushion or I don't know what, but this feeling of the freedom to reincarnate, that's what it's about. It's not about male to female, you know, binary. There's only two options, and then you can sort of be a little bit male but a bit female and a little bit female but a bit. It's not about that. And I think that it's such a radical book. I mean, 1928, it's supersonic. And the people that your forces that you're describing who are still trying to categorize and recategorize, and they're just missing a trick. It's such a waste of what nature and human experience is, which is to be properly free.
Annie, I think you had a question.
Hi, Tilda. Thank you so much.
Hi, Annie.
So yeah, I'm curious to hear what is the greatest challenge you faced and how has that informed or influenced your work? Also a follow-up to your thoughts on identity. What does transformation mean for you?
I have to think about the challenge. Well, I suppose I really want to find an honest answer to your question about challenge. I suppose, yeah, just keeping it going, just keeping on the tightrope, keeping one's heart high and keeping faith in all of this stuff we're talking about. Because it is wonderful and it is wonderful to talk about it. But this is why I say that my real inspiration is conversation. You know, when the conversation stops and you're by yourself and your colleague isn't there and you're having to drum it up by yourself, that's the biggest challenge that I would suggest most of us face as artists. And it's certainly as a, you know, as a communicator and as a collaborative artist, as what the Germans call a Mitarbeiter, which is what I am. I work with people. It's the biggest challenge. So being alone, and even though I love to be alone, but in terms of keeping the sense of the work going when one's alone, keeping faith in the power of the ideas to just keep rolling. I think that's the biggest challenge. So yeah, occasionally it does feel, I mean, I'm a very lazy person. I'm a very idle soul. I love, that's why this sort of becalmment that we're in is on the one hand, kind of wonderful blessing and also extremely dangerous, because I probably will just have a mountain of ironing to show for it at the end. But it's, I think, I'm trying to bless my laziness and find it a useful thing. But, you know, having to sort of trick oneself into staying productive's the wrong word, because I think to be endlessly productive is also not that useful, but just to keep faith, really, just to keep faith in the process. And then your other question was about transformation. I think, for me, transformation is, well, again, I'm going to use a practical example, and I'm afraid I'm going to be very repetitive and go back to talking about Orlando, because because I've been thinking about it recently, so it's popped into my mind. When we were making Orlando, the film, and I don't know how many of you have seen it, but we made this film based on Virginia Woolf's novel Orlando, which is about a young nobleman, Elizabethan nobleman, Englishman, who one morning wakes up and is a woman. And when we were discussing this, Sally Potter and I, and we were looking at ways for me to be male and ways for me to be female, very, very quickly it occurred to me that this was not the solution. To look at differences was not the solution. The way was to look at something that would not change at all, to find a face, to find an attitude, to find a spirit that was exactly the same from state to state, from century to century, from gender to gender. And so I would say that for me, transformation is possible if one is extremely loose and extremely consistent and extremely relaxed and settled. And then one can be really flexible. I remember once, talking of tightropes, I once had to learn to walk on a tightrope, and it was great. I don't know how many of you have done it, but there was this moment when I was falling off all the time. And then somebody pointed out to me that I was too attached to the ground, and that what I needed to do, and that I was too stiff, and that what I needed to do was, when I felt myself going, was to bend. And I was really flexible, and then I bent, and then I went up again, and then I felt like I was attached to the sky. And this feeling of flexibility, that's what I think of the possibilities of transformation, is if one is truly relaxed and truly flexible and open to all these different possibilities, and nothing's brittle or hard. I think that's, I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's making sense in my head. Does that make sense to you, Annie?
Yeah, no, that was a beautiful image as well.
Good.
We have time for one more question.
Hi, Matilda.
Hi, Ava. Also have a very, very good cushion game, by the way. I like your cushion.
Thank you. I can't stop thinking about when you were talking about space and the frame. And it reminded me, and not describing yourself as an actor, it reminded me of something Isabelle Huppert said at the New York Film Festival once, talking about non-acting, like describing herself as just to think more about what it means to perform in the world. And I kind of wonder, how you approach it. Like, is it like with your guts, or like, do you approach it with a method, or how is that process for you?
Wow. Well, first of all, I would say that in terms of, well, I was going to say in terms of my work in the cinema, but it's true of all of my work, whether I'm working with a photographer, whether I'm working with an artist, with a painter, whether I'm working with a filmmaker, or if I'm working with a designer. So I've talked about the conversation and the collaboration and the fellowship, but then there is some kind of relationship to the image from outside. So for example, if I'm making a film, and I've worked with pretty much most of my idols in cinema and photography, I have been incredibly blessed to have the opportunity to step into a Gregory Crewdson frame, or to step into a Richard Avedon frame, or to step into a Bela Tarr film, or a Wes Anderson, or a Derek Jarman, or whatever. And when I do that, when I step into a frame, I'm very, very well aware that I'm in a Bela Tarr film, or that I'm in a Wes Anderson film. And I carry that sense of the context beyond what I've said already about the actual frame, the actual shot. It's very important for me to see the shot and look through the camera and see exactly what the parameters of the shot are. But beyond that, the sensibility of the filmmaker the sensibility of that particular milieu, that's how I approach it. I don't really approach it. That's why I'm, you know, embarrassed to call myself an actor, because I know that actors tend to work from inside. I don't. I tend to work from the image, from outside. I picture myself in that frame, in that milieu, and then I try and relax into it. And then I try and believe that I belong there, because it's not so easy to believe that I belong in a Bel État film, where my daughter is played by a Hungarian woman and my husband is played by a Czech director, and we're all screaming at each other in different languages. But I have to believe it. You know, that's my task, is to relax and to believe that I have a place there. Yeah. You know, I worshipped Jim Jarmusch's films for years, and I never dreamed that there would be a place for me in his world. And now there's been a place for me 4 times in Jim Jarmusch's films. It's phenomenal to me. But that's my appreciation of, and I would say worship of, his landscape, means that I try and get over the shock of imagining myself in it, and I try and relax myself, thinking, oh, he chose me to be here, I'm here, okay, I'm here with a katana sword. That feeling of belonging, like it's like a vase of flowers and I'm just a thistle being stuck into the top, and okay, he wants me here. That's how I work at it. But I come from outside, and I'm sure that's to do with my art background, really.
Well, Tilda, thank you so much for your extraordinary goodwill and generosity. And
thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you.
I want to, everyone, take on their audio, and so we could give Tilda.
Thanks, Tilda.
Thank you, Tilda.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe. Come up with magic. This time, come up with magic.
I love you.